Good afternoon to you. Mark Studd with HurricaneTrack.com here with your Hurricane Pro and HD video blog for the 25th of July 2013. Taking a look at what's going on in the tropics. Now we have Tropical Storm Dorian out here in the eastern Atlantic and Vest 99L up here to the north and east of Bermuda. This system right here really not going to do anything. 10% chance of development. Dorian is an interesting situation here. Winds at 60 miles per hour. Pressure down to 999 millibars. We'll take a look at the forecast track real quick. This as of the 11 a.m. advisory package. Pretty steady movement off to the west-northwest over the next 5 days. You can see that the northern leewards and parts of Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic in the 4 and 5 day forecast cone of uncertainty. This track subject to change, as you know, especially at the longer time periods. Let's take a look at a satellite picture, a couple of them, a loop actually, of Dorian out here in the Atlantic. First is a visible satellite loop, and that is literally like you were out in space looking down on a black and white. It's not colorized. It's not like a pretty marble shot that you see from the space station, the International Space Station, but you get the idea. We're not looking at cloud top temperatures or anything like that. This is a visible satellite picture, and you can clearly see Dorian spinning out here in the tropical Atlantic. Now, even though the circulation itself, where the deepest convection is located, is fairly small, I mentioned in my blog post at HurricaneTrack.com today that the overall envelope of energy with it seems to be rather large. And what I mean by that, you can see it has a pretty good spiral band coming in here, another one trailing off from the southwest, another one out here. It just has a large envelope, a large reach, if you will, and if it can just break free of some of this dry air that's out there, and let's take a look at the water vapor loop, and you can see that dry air, that mid-level dry air. And when I say dry, it's all about the relative humidity values in the mid-levels of the atmosphere. Don't think about dry air like Arctic dry air that comes in during the winter and you get a static buildup on your fingertips when you touch a doorknob. It shocks you. Just a little bit of a decrease in relative humidity in the mid-levels of the atmosphere can create instability problems. There's not enough moisture in the atmosphere to fuel the lift or the convection that you can see pretty clearly here, this rainbow coloring. That's the convective activity, but out here is this dry mid-level air, and so as it expands and tries to reach out and fill itself with more moisture, it pulls in some of that dry air, so it's got this little bit of pulsing up and then going back down kind of thing going on. If we look at a close-up visible satellite shot, you can kind of see what I'm talking about here. You see the showers and thunderstorms in here. They come and go. You don't have a round, well-developed, central dense overcast holding its own, and you can even see a lot of this dry air as indicated by these low-level clouds here. So it's dealing with some issues. It's trying its best to survive and doing pretty well if you think about it. The convection seems to be right over the low-level center in there. So Dorian hanging on. Pretty good structure with it. If it can get into warmer sea surface temperatures and away from some of that dry, more stable mid-level air, then it might intensify. And that's what the intensity forecast shows. It's steadily increasing over the next several days. What about upper-level wind shear? Here is Dorian over here. Right now the wind shear around it very light. And basically wind shear, you think about clouds that need to build in the atmosphere and go up like a big old thunderstorm. That's my rendition of a tropical thunderstorm. They need to be able to go up. This upward motion is what fuels the convection. And when you have the ability of the air to just expand outward in every direction, that upward motion is much more efficient. But when you have the air coming in across the top of a thunderstorm and shearing the top of it off and blowing it away, then you don't really have that efficient spreading out of the clouds and the energy into the lower parts of the stratosphere that you would with a more conducive environment. What we look for is an anticyclone in the upper levels, and we have that here. There's a nice upper level high sitting over the system, but out ahead of it, cyclonic flow. You can clearly see that upper level low right here. Very strong shearing winds ahead of the system, but it looks like that all of this will kind of move along with it, this protective cocoon, and so Dorian has a chance to intensify some as it moves west. Now, where is it headed? This is the 500 millibar chart from the GFS, or the Global Forecast System, looking up at about 18 to 20,000 feet in the atmosphere. And before we look at the loop, this is the initial conditions from about 8 o'clock Eastern Time this morning. Here's this big old mountain of air sitting out over the Atlantic, and this is Dorian reaching up to the 500 millibar level. So it shows up pretty nicely through the mid-levels of the atmosphere, and that's important to see. Now, if we go through time here, I'm going to go through these different images. This is just stepping through about every 3 hours or so. So here we are 24 hours out. So this is valid Friday morning, and you can see this ridge here gets bigger and thicker in the atmosphere. So Dorian cannot turn into this. This is literally like a big old roadblock sitting out here, and it will not allow the storm to turn into it. Instead, it's forced along to the southern periphery of that system, that big old high. And if we move on out into time to 48 hours, you can see that that ridge holds pretty strong in the central Atlantic here, keeping Dorian just to the south of 20 degrees of latitude right there. And if we let the loop just play on out, you see what happens. Dorian steps on through, and actually at the end of the 5-day period here ends up to a position just north, or perhaps even right on top of Puerto Rico. And we'll speed this up just a little bit. See, there you go. It stays just to the south of that ridge there. I think it's pretty easy to see that. There's the ridge right here in the central Atlantic. Dorian just cannot turn north into it, and so it stays to the south of that. When we get to the end here, we'll stop it. So there we are with it at the real close to Puerto Rico, but it doesn't show it as strong. The GFS may be starting to weaken it at this point. The bottom line, what I want you to take away from this is pretty simple. Keep your eyes open if you're anywhere in the Lesser Antilles, Northern Leeward Islands, Puerto Rico, and the Dominican Republic. Sometimes these ridges are so strong that these systems can come in and then they can turn south a little bit. Hurricane Ike did that in 2008. I don't want to make any more comparisons beyond that. But sometimes they are turned south a little bit, and if this doesn't come in as a strong system, it could still be quite a rainmaker for this area, and rain is certainly one of the hazards of tropical cyclones to keep in mind. The other part that we can look at on here, the other part of the atmosphere, is the 850 millibar level, or about 5,000 feet up, and that too shows pretty good reflection of Dorian at the 5,000 foot level, 850 millibars. There it is, and you see it tries to dip south there just a little bit towards the end, south of 20 degrees latitude, right there. Look at that. It goes right along and then just south of it, finally ending up near Puerto Rico at day 5. We'll go back here. There it is in the Puerto Rico area, eastern Dominican Republic. So you folks keep an eye on that. It could be coming your way, and you don't have to have a hurricane for this to be a problem. It can bring heavy rain, especially if it slows down. There's a lot to watch with this system. It's interesting, though, because it's kind of fickle. You know, this could go either way. It could end up being a major issue for some people, perhaps becoming a hurricane, or it could succumb to some of these negative conditions and weaken considerably. The GFS eventually dissipates it over the rugged terrain of Hispaniola beyond the day 5 time frame, which we'll worry about later. But that's what things are looking like now with Dorian in the eastern Pacific. We do have Tropical Storm Flossie, but that's headed out to sea, so no need to waste any time talking about that. It'll be absolutely no threat to land for several days, but we'll talk about it a little bit more tomorrow or perhaps over the weekend, that maybe Flossie will get close enough to Hawaii to raise a couple of eyebrows, but we will worry about that later. All right? Have yourselves a good rest of your Thursday. Again, I am Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com. That's my site. Always a privilege to do these videos for you on Hurricane Pro and Hurricane HD. I'll be back with more info for you tomorrow.